Okay, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the Explorer combo. So this deck has its roots in the Golgari midrange deck that was pretty popular before Ravnica Allegiance came out. Um, and that the deck it has its core built around the Explorer combo, which I'll go over first. So the one of the main cards of that combo is Wildgrowth Walker. He gets a +1/+1 counter and gains you 3 life every time a creature you control explores. The life gain from this, as well as the high toughness, is great against aggro decks, and it's a pretty decent early blocker against those decks as well. Usually an opponent will deal with this eventually using removal, unless they're playing burn as removal and it gets too big too quickly. But the fact that they have to deal with it is kind of a point in his favor. You always play 4 of these in main deck in Sultai Midrange. This Jadelight Ranger, it explores twice when it enters the battlefield, and that kind of makes it Wildgrowth Walker's best friend. It will often be a 3/2 for free for 3 mana that draws you a land, or even a 4/3 for 3 that helps you dig to the cards that you need. So even without Wildgrowth Walker on the battlefield, it's a pretty good card, and you will always play 4 of these in your Sultai Midrange deck, in the main deck. Okay, next one, Merfolk Branchwalker. Merfolk Branchwalker is kind of like Jadelight Ranger's little cousin. It costs 1 less mana, and for that you get 1 less power, 1 less toughness, and 1 less explore. Wait, no you don't. The power and toughness are the same. You just get 1 less explore for 1 less mana. This has the same kind of synergy with Wildgrowth Walker, and you will always want to play 4 of these also in your Sultai midrange deck. Alright, Seekers Squire. This is the same as Merfolk Branchwalker, except it's black and it has the power and toughness switched. This is not as attractive in Sultai midrange, and most builds don't even play it. I have a single copy in the main deck. I'm kind of leaning into the Explorer synergies for game 1, but I almost always end up taking this out in game 2 or 3, 2 and 3, once I know what I want from the sideboard in any given match. Okay, so the next category of cards is ramp. First, I will look at Llanowar Elves. This is kind of the OG mana dork, and as far as creature base ramp goes, it's kind of as efficient as you get. I play 4 of these in the main deck, and you might also augment this or replace it with Incubation Druid, which I will look at next. I only play the elves myself. So let's look at Incubation Druid here. Incubation Druid costs 1 mana more than Llanowar Elves, with the advantage of being relevant in the late game. It's another creature-based ramp option, and most builds I've seen actually do play 4 of these in the main deck, either on their own or in combination with Llanowar Elves. I actually think this is slightly more popular than the Llanowar Elves are. I might end up playing this in the future. Right now I'm not. If you're playing Hadana's Climb in your deck, you definitely want this, because Hadana's Climb can put her counter on this early, and it just ramps you so insanely quickly then. Okay, the next category I'm going to look at is finishers. First I'll look at Carnage Tyrant. Okay, so Carnage Tyrant is kind of one of the finishers of choice for Sultai midrange. Probably around half the builds I've seen play a couple of these in the main deck. It's really good against control. It's especially good against fairy, and even the mirror can help break board stalemates. The other big finisher is Hydroid Krasis. So this is a new Ravnica Allegiance card, and it's one of the main reasons you're going to branch out into blue, a third color in this deck, as opposed to just old-style Golgari midrange. It draws you cards, it gains you life. The card draw and life gain happens even if it's countered. The trigger goes on the stack as soon as you cast it. This is a real threat in the air, and it can be a good finisher in its own right. In a pinch, you can play it as a 2/2 flyer for 4 that cantrips. Most Sultai midrange builds play a play set of these, all 4 of them in the main deck. I play 3. I leave one out to make more room for Carnage Tyrant. Okay, let's look at utility creatures and removal now. Midnight Reaper. Midnight Reaper is not super popular, but the extra card draw from it can spell the difference between a win or a loss. It can be a liability in some matchups, especially in a mirror where the board gets gummed up and the game is determined by milling out. I play 2 of them in the main deck, and probably about a quarter of the Sultai midrange builds that are being played also do that. Okay, Ravenous Chupacabra. This guy takes out an enemy creature while simultaneously giving you a body that can attack or block. I think it's a great addition to this deck. The fact that you can bring it back from the graveyard using Find Finality or Memorial Folly is a big bonus. You see a couple of these main deck in probably about 2/3 of Sultai Midrange builds. I also play a couple of them. Let's look at another deck I don't have in my build. Hostage Taker. So Hostage Taker is another card that you can use a blue splash for. It works as removal that is sometimes repeatable, similarly to Ravenous Chupacabra. And it has the added bonus over Chupacabra that you can cast the creature you took hostage. That advantage comes with added risk that if your opponent deals with it quickly enough, they can get their creature back. I kind of lean towards Ravenous Chupacabra in this risk-benefit analysis and don't play Hostage Taker, but I've seen people on forums and stuff swear by it. It especially works as a foil to Hydroid Krasis, because then even if your opponent gets it back, it comes back as a 0/0 and immediately dies. Probably about 2/3 of Sultai midrange builds have this in the main deck. Okay, let's look at Cast Down. Nope, this is cheap instant speed removal. It hits most problem creatures, and most Sultai midrange builds will include a couple of these in the main deck. You do have to be willing to side this out against opponents that don't have many creatures, that rely on Teferi as a win condition, basically most control decks, and also against decks like Jeskai control that only basically play legendary creatures like Niv Mizzet as finishers. Higher on the curve is Vraska's Contempt. This is unconditional instant speed removal, and it is a must include. I haven't ever seen a version of Sultai Midrange that doesn't have a couple of these in the main deck. It's especially good against Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, since you can hit him with it before the untapped trigger gives them access to a counterspell. It's also good for taking care of creatures that otherwise would be difficult to take care of permanently, such as Rekindling Phoenix and Gate Colossus. Alright, Find Finality. Probably about half the builds of Sultai Midrange will have a few copies of this in the main deck, like mine does. Being able to use this to get key creatures back from the graveyard cheaply is kind of key to this deck functioning well in a lot of matchups. And the Finality side is great against weenie strategies. You can even use it to set your opponent back in mirror matches if you're lucky enough to get the sequencing just right. Let's look at another card that I don't actually have in this deck. Assassin's Trophy. So, Assassin's Trophy shows up in a little fewer than half the builds I've seen of Sultai Midrange. Usually when it's there, it shows up as 2 copies in the main deck. It's cheap, it's instant speed, and it's unconditional, but in my experience, wrapping the opponent is often too high a price to pay, and I have not included it in my deck. Okay. Planeswalkers. So, Vivien Reid. Vivien Reid is kind of a must include in this deck. Basically, every version of Sultai Midrange I've seen has 3 of these in the main deck. Mine does. She draws you creatures and lands that you need for your deck to work, and she can also kill pesky flyers and enchantments. If you're lucky enough to tick her up and ultimate her, it makes your army of creatures very hard to deal with. Okay. Let's look at another card that I don't actually have in mind. Adana's Climb. I mentioned this earlier. So, I haven't actually seen this show up in Sultai Midrange very often, but I have played against it in some mirror games where I was completely destroyed by it. It allowed my opponent to quickly turn a small Hydroid Krasis into basically a flying death machine, and it also works really well with Incubation Druid. If you're playing Incubation Druid, you should probably actually be playing this. I've seen it maybe in 1 in 5 versions of the deck that I've seen, usually as a 2 of. Okay, let's just look at lands. So you basically have your some on-color basics and rare duels. In addition to those, you have Memorial Folly. I have 2 copies of this in the main deck, and that seems to be about a 50-50 chance of that being included in versions of Sultai Midrange that I've seen. Using this to get back Ravenous Chupacabra, Hydroid Krasis, and Carnage Tyrant is pretty awesome, in my opinion. Alright, let's look at the sideboard. You'll see a lot of variants from build to build in the sideboard. So I will talk about what I'm playing, and I will also talk about what else, other cards, sideboard cards that I've seen in different Sultai midrange builds. Duress. Duress is the one card that you will always see a play set of. You'll always see 4 copies of this in the sideboard, or virtually always, of a Sultai midrange deck. You bring this in against combo and control decks, and that you can really use it to disrupt their game plans. Disdainful Stroke. Most versions of the deck will have a couple copies of this in the sideboard. You bring that in against decks with high cost threats like Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and Lyra Dawnbringer. Just because of some other cards that I've included, I only have 1 copy of it here. I might actually change that in the future. Negate is another counter spell that you can use your blue splash for. Most versions of Sultai midrange play 2 of these. I play 2 of them. It doesn't hit creatures, but it does hit potentially problematic spells of any other type. It's also cheap to cast. Cry of the Carnarium. Basically, it's a small sweeper that exiles. It's great against aggro and weenie strategies that are in standard right now. It's a good option for most black decks to have access to. Probably 75% or so of Sultai Midrange builds have have copies of this in the sideboard, usually 2 of them. I'm actually including 3. I had seen a lot of weenie. I'm actually seeing less of that now on the best of 3 ladder, so I might bring this down to 2 in mine as well. Okay, Vraska's Contempt. Basically everything I said before. Deals with recursive and indestructible threats as well as planeswalkers. And I like to have a third one that I can board in against decks where I need it. Especially because those decks cast down tends to be bad against, so I can take out cast down and put this in. Most Sultai mid-range decks will have a copy of this in the sideboard as well. Alright. I also have a copy of Tendershoot Dryad in my sideboard. This is not a very popular choice as far as different Sultai mid-range builds go. I like it because it allows me to attack from a slightly different axis, building up an army of 3/3 saprolings over a few turns. It's decent for breaking board stalls, but it is bad against sweepers and things playing a lot of shocks, unless you're lucky enough for it to not get hit by one of those. Eldest Reborn. Currently, I have not seen a lot of this in Sultai midrange sideboards. I'm running 2 of them. I like to bring them in, usually along with counter spells to help protect them and make sure they go through against decks that have a single copy of a bomb finisher. It's also good for dealing with hexproof threats like Carnage Tyrant in the mirror, although that means you usually have to clear away smaller creatures using Finality or something like that. Crushing Canopy. I tend to side this in against decks that have problem flyers or enchantments that I need to deal with quickly, earlier than I can get a Vivien Reid online. I just run a single copy because I tend to prefer using Vivien for this effect later in the game. But it is also a card you don't actually see very often in the sideboard of Sultai mid-range decks. Let's look at some other sideboard possibilities that I don't have, but that you do see, and that can be useful. First, I'll look at Thrashing Brontodon. This is a pretty popular card. Probably more than half of the Sultai mid-range builds I've seen play it. You bring this in against decks that have problematic enchantments, and also it's good against weenie decks just because you get a 3/4 for 3. Alright. Vraska Relic Seeker. Basically, Vraska Relic Seeker works as additional removal that hits artifacts and enchantments, in addition to creatures, and the ability to create 2/2s that trade with aggressive creatures with low toughness or attack aggressively themselves can add some value to this card. The 2/2s it makes do have menace, so they do have to be double blocked. Moment of Craving. Kill small things for cheap at instant speed. You get a little bit of life gain from it. It's really good against weenie style decks. You can use it to pick off small attackers and make the game longer, since a longer game is usually in your favor in those matchups. You can use it to kill Runaway Steamkin in response to its trigger, which is great. It can take out small indestructible things like a Danto Vanguard. Also, hopefully in response to the trigger that they paid 4 life for. It fills a similar role as Vraska's Contempt, but it's more efficient for smaller creatures. I've only ever seen a single copy of this included in the sideboard. Probably half the versions of Sultai Midrange I've seen do that. Alright. Oh wait. Nope. Lost my keyboard. So, Cast Down. I have this in the main board, but it's also a card that you see a lot of times in the sideboard. People just want to have access to another copy of it. That usually shows up also as a sideboard singleton, maybe in around half the versions of the deck that I've seen. I misspelled that. Assassin's Trophy. Maybe in 2 out of 5 decks, you'll see this as a single copy in a Sultai midrange sideboard. And basically it has all the same arguments for and against it that I mentioned before. And the last sideboard card I want to mention, which is also a card I mentioned earlier, is Hostage Taker. If you don't run it in the main deck, or if you just want to have access to another copy of it, this is something else that is reasonable to have in a Sultai midrange sideboard. Probably about a quarter of the builds I've seen have this in the sideboard as well, almost always as a single copy. Alright, well that's the deck, and now I will go and include some gameplay. So this is basically the same Golgari midrange package from before Ravnica Allegiance came out, with blue added to allow for Hydroid Krasis and like counter spells in the sideboard. Oh, this is really bad. I'm going to keep this and hope I can scry a land to the top. Good. Alright, play Wildgrowth Walker. Play a Wildgrowth Walker again. They're not going to find me. Not going to counter this time. I'm going to play this Breeding Pool untapped and play Llanowar Elves. What am I going to discard? Probably Llanowar Elves, because I want to cast. I can't cast down Nicol Bolas. I could get Merfolk Branchwalker back, though. That might be the best thing I can do right now. I wish I could Finality. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get a Wildgrowth Walker and a Merfolk Branchwalker back. And, yeah, I'll play the Wildgrowth Walker. Why not? Can't attack into that. Oh boy, we're getting a dragon. Or not. You know, he was just plussing it up, I see. Alright. Well, let's see if they counter my Branchwalker. Nope. Still can't attack. Still don't have a target for cast down. So, no attacks. Oh boy. I think I'm gonna die. Oh yeah. No, nothing to do with cast down. Pass. Take the 4, and maybe get a Ravenous Chupacabra. Nope, too much to ask for. I'll play this tapped. Alright. Oh, what's his ultimate? -7? Okay. Okay. Alright. So I guess I attack one into Sarkin and one into here. I don't know. At this point, let's see here. Let's see if this Krasis can do something for me. Ooh, Overgrown too. Woohoo! I'm dead. Good game. Okay, what can we... Disdainful Stroke is good against Bolus, but not against Niv. So what I'm going to try to do is bring in an Eldest Reborn, a Vraska's Contempt, a Tendershoot Dryad, and a Crushing Canopy. So more things that kill flyers. Take out a couple of the Explore package parts. Alright, I will play first. And I guess I'm keeping this because I accidentally clicked keep. I'll play a Breeding Pod untapped and the Llanowar Elves. So, I'm gonna actually play a Jadelight Ranger and see if I can draw up to something decent here. Okay, just getting past some lands is worth it. Um, I can play a Wildgrowth Walker, a Llanowar Elves, and play a Memorial to Folly tapped. And I'll attack with Jadelight Ranger. So my guess is, yeah, I was just gonna say, I think they probably sideboarded in some Cry against the Cry of the Carnarium. Let's see here. I want to play my other Wildgrowth Walker. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. And Watery Grave tapped. Gives me mana for Vraska's Contempt on the next turn or Midnight Reaper, depending on what they do. Okay. Should I play Vivien Reid? I don't really want to play Vivien Reid yet. I think I'm going to play Midnight Reaper. I'll play Vivien Reid maybe on the next turn, or if they play out a flyer I need to kill, I'll definitely play Vivien Reid on the next turn. Oh man. Well, at least I got the attack, the one extra damage in. Yeah, I'll play a Merfolk Branchwalker. Woodland Cemetery. And now I have Vraska's Contempt that I can cast on their turn if I need to. What are they doing? Oh, that's their Vraska's Contempt. There we go. Okay, so there goes my Merfolk Branchwalker. Sure would like to be able to Vraska's Contempt something. Oh boy. So I will Vivien Reid. I'll destroy the Eldest Reborn, so I don't have to discard anything. Oh boy, everything's getting blown up. There we go. Go ahead and attack, and Memorial Folly can get something back. A Merfolk Branchwalker or another Wildgrowth Walker. I'm gonna go for the Wildgrowth Walker. Cast that out. Just on the off chance that I draw something that turns it on well. Oh shoot, I messed that up. Oh well, I guess I Ravenous Chupacabra and hope they don't counter it. I hope they don't dive down. Nice. Yes, very nice. Cool. Oh boy. There goes one of my walkers. I guess I better kill Ral. I'm gonna play out my Vivien Reid first and see if I can see what I get. Cool, I'll get a Hydroid Krasis and hope they don't make me discard it. From what I've seen from the deck. Okay, good game. I'm gonna put in some counter magic since I saw Some expensive things I might want to counter. Like I might have other targets other than just Nicol Bolas. Cast Down actually does not seem useful in this deck. Against this deck. Yeah, I'll leave it like that. I'm going to keep this. It's kind of a risky keep, but hopefully Wildgrowth Walker and Merfolk Branchwalker can get me going. Ugh. They didn't take anything. Guess they didn't want me to. Oh no, they took a Vivien Reid. Okay. Makes sense. Let's get me a land, Merfolk Branchwalker. Go ahead and attack, and then I'll play the Breeding Pool. Tap. Oh boy, they're making me discard everything. This is why we can't have nice things. Alright. Play another Merfolk Branchwalker. Keep attacking. Play the Watery Grave tapped. So I have mana for Ravenous Chupacabra if that helps me ever. Go away, pinchy mixing butt. Ooh, Carnage Tyrant. Nice. Let's see here. And play this untapped. Oh man. Sad. Okay. Well, at least I know they're not going to counter Hydroid Krasis, except I accidentally passed turn, so it didn't matter. Dough. Alright, fine. Actually, I'm going to play Vivien Reid. See if I can get land for Carnage Tyrant. Yeah, I'll take the Watery Grave. then I can play Carnage Tyrant on my next turn. Oh, I guess I didn't have a next turn. Alright, see you guys next time.